Sì, ma il giorno dopo secondo me
ma non lo so, io ho una rubrica su questo.
adesso fra sì, questo è l'obiettivo. Delegazione di
Fantastico, no, dovrei fare, posso fare il però la domanda che faccio su quel ragazzo lì è perché i risultati di tutti i ragazzi infatti stai lavorando
è esattamente quello il punto. Ci siamo capiti esattamente. È esattamente quello che stiamo dicendo. Allora, adesso non so dovrebbe essere messo conseguenze non so se nel PNR Draghi aveva aumentato i soldi c'è il livello della Germania suggeriva che c'erano 5-10 miliardi ce ne devo aver messo un totale non stiamo più parlando solo questo è sì, no, certo, qui non si va neanche per esempio la macchina dell'analisi con il quale facciamo non è più un trasferimento di corrente logistica tra noi. Allora la macchina è prodotta ma anche se vogliamo fare un tecnico di parla di applicazione non è neanche mai farò un mattoncino no, non sono al governo no. E che ci piacerebbe
Madrid.
La ringrazio. Paolo Dadelli, fisica, Palma, l'università diversa. Che poi non so se veniamo utilizzati dal governo inglese per stilare le loro posti. No, però capisce. Va bene, grazie. Abbiamo invitato ma non è già andato via?
No, fa ancora anche lei.
Sì, sì, dei tempi d'oro, sì. Quello sì, mi dicevano i ragazzi più.
Più di spese mediche.
Mamma mia, sì.
Ma sì.
Per tutti? Sì, madre.
Sei anche alla prossima talk.
Sto qui a sentire il prossimo sulle AI, tra un po', cioè non so quanto capirò sinceramente, non saprò meglio, cioè meno so, cioè più conosco le cose ci stanno. State andando o rimanete qui anche per
Noi stiamo andando, credo. Sì.
mi dai anche io, ecco un attimo con una sigaretta per dire.
No, per piacere.
Uscite di qua? Sì, quella principale, no, non so quella sono uscita. No, sì, è qua. Noi stavamo uscendo, io e un attimo prima.
Era difficile nella gravità che determina il modo di sangue poi io ho risposto mi dicendogli no, non è la gravità, è l'anatomia, poi io mi ho risposto gli altri. E poi hanno risposto gli altri. L'altra gente si è vinto lì perché non era già di questo, non era già di quest'altro, e poi loro hanno dato l'ultima parola. No, perché poi sì, sì, almeno è probabilmente sì, non so, siccome c'è il dibattito, è un buon argomento. No, guarda che invece quelle sale che ho, però ce ne sì, no, no, assolutamente, non ho assolutamente idea. Sì, Infatti, la faccio.
Tutto a posto.
Sì, Nello spero oggi un po'. Spero di questo lato che vediamo. Elettronica.
Ingegnere. Pensavo di
No. Non è elettronica.
l'asilo.
Sì, sì, sì.
E quindi tutta la parte è quello che non
Sono medical physics e biomedical engineering.
Se mettiamo anche delle domande su policy regulation.
il libro
Ok.
sì, hanno sì,
2 minuti e iniziamo.
ok,
Grazie.
che non si può dare di poco, ci sono scritti in campo di generici.
Sì, per questo vogliamo iniziare col tecnico, poi andare sugli altri per finire con la policy. Se lo vogliamo intendere.
Non ci riesce, ma io dentro cioè ormai non c'è più.
No, nel senso, se non si sta lasciando di fare questa sanità di cazzo. Sappiamo che io dirò una sensazione molto, io dirò una sensazione sarà molto un po' cioè che se il futuro cioè chi guiderà l'Italia l'intelligenza artificiale può essere l'Italia in questo senso. La dimostrazione è più questo io che è andato a Paolo e anche il comitato strategico delle AI di leader no, sono opportunità
Questo sto partendo da parte
Signore Tovino.
No, no, è molto in gamba, devo dire. No, no, questo No, no, sai, video. E sei parte della la tua giornata? Anche là, quello che allora entrata con la
Piacere.
immagino, quello è bello di Cristianini, che stai all'ordine, sono già clienti interessanti. E ieri no, infatti mi ha detto che era la fine. Io non mi sono neanche assolutata. Una volta ma perché
Okay. Welcome everyone. It is my honor to introduce the last panel of the 2024 Italian Symposium. After 4 days, we've come to the end, and I'm really honored to introduce this panel and about AI and ethics with Professor Nello Cristianini and Professor Anna Maria Mandalari. I'll let the moderators from the Oxford Italian Society deal with this panel, and I thank you very much for all the attention and compliments that you've given us for this event. Thank you very much.
Hello, welcome everyone to the last panel of this Italian Symposium. It's only fitting that we end this amazing event with this panel that's looking at the future. So we have here with us Professor Anna Maria Mandalari, Assistant Professor at UCL London. She's also a member of the Italian Secretariat Committee for Strategic Use of AI. And she is also research and honorary fellow at Imperial College London. She is an expert in private security of Internet of Things devices, and her research interests include IoT, privacy and security, networking, and internet measurement techniques. Alongside her, we have Professor Nello Cristianini, a professor of artificial intelligence at the University of Bath. He's also a renowned author and influential figure in the field of AI research, and he has authored many books that we will be talking about today. Professor Cristianini's field of research include new machine learning algorithms, ethics of AI, and regulatory policies on AI use. we're gonna structure this panel with a brief introduction to AI, the technical aspects, the ethical aspects, and the role of Italy in this field.
Thank you very much. So we're gonna start talking about, with a very in brief, how would you describe what AI is? Just in a few words. Both of you, either one of you.
Would you like this one?
Thank you. I think it's the both art and science of building machines that behave in an intelligent manner. That is what it is.
AI, it's like very complicated to define, I will say. And I will describe it as a way to emulate the human behavior, but in a better way.
Thank you. Regarding that, we would love to ask you some questions about what you think would be the next improvements within the next 5 years in terms of AI, both in terms of like Internet of Things, but also about LLM models and how that would play both at the general level in terms of like AI, but also how that would impact everyday lives for everyday people.
Okay, so that's a lot of questions. I will pick some of them. I will leave the other ones to my colleague. The Internet of Things I will not touch. But the best way to look at the future is to think about history, the past. This is a quest that has lasted for more than 70 years. We've been trying our best to do it, and we learned a lot of things along the way. And we learn from mistakes. So I would be, the first thing it should be said, in my opinion, is that intelligence existed on this planet before humans did. It is not necessarily a feature of humans. Animals can be intelligent, and machines can be intelligent. And I say this because it's useful to understand that this is not about necessarily language and consciousness and awareness or art. It is something much more fundamental. A chicken crossing the road, trying to avoid the bus, that requires intelligence. And that is why it evolved. We find evidence of intelligent behavior in fossils for a long time. So it is probably the ability to pursue goals and to behave in a sensible manner under unforeseen conditions. If I knew before exactly the situation I have to face, I can just program the behavior. If I know that this is the chessboard configuration I have to deal with, I can just list the right moves. If I need to block spam emails, I could have a list of emails to block. But when the email is new, when the chess configuration is new, when the world is different, if you want to behave well, you must demonstrate intelligence before humans ever showed up on this planet. That kind of ability machines do have. YouTube can recommend videos to a new user, a new video to a new user. It can understand. It's pursuing its goals in new situations. In order to behave in an intelligent manner of this type, you must have a model of the world. Simplified, approximated, it doesn't matter. A model of the world is how you deal with new situations. So that is the first thing to be said. Now, in the past, we spent decades trying to emulate some high-level features of the highest human abilities, logic, theorem proving. So that's the mistake we made for a long time. If I had time, I would tell you the story. If you ask me, I will tell you later the story of Carl Sagan and Pioneer 10 and the probe we sent into space, but you have to ask for it. I don't want to monopolize. But along the way, we tried and failed over and over again to directly emulate our logical sort of symbolic reasoning until we gave up. It was only when we gave up and we started using statistical tricks that success started coming. And that line of reasoning, I will stop now, took us directly to LLMs and GPT. And if you want to know, I will talk about it later.
Regarding IoT, I would just ask a question to you. How many of you have an IoT devices at home? Or, okay, not many. I can see that many of you don't have televisions because nowadays, all televisions since 20 years ago, they come with internet connectivity on it. In fact, any object nowadays can be connected to the internet, from smart speakers to cameras. Even your fridge or your bed can be connected to the internet. And this is the definition of Internet of Things. And Internet of Things make our life easier and make our life comfortable. But what is the real value they are giving to us? And this is where my research journey started for IoT and AI. I wanted to know what we are invisible trading in exchange to these devices and this technology. And I hope that today we can talk about this.
Thank you. Starting from what you just said, what would think should be like some of the limits with AI? So Professor Cristianini said that one of the limits could be unpredictability, as numerical methods can predict something they just have been coded for. So do you think there's any way in the future where AI could be used even for unpredictable situations or even more unpredictable situations?
Well, I don't want to disagree, but I didn't mention unpredictability. That's a bit of a slightly, but if I may be a bit more, slightly more pedantic. What was the question? Yeah, so how to deal with the new situations, and so you want intelligence to understand the situation and make sense of it, and then decide how to act. And the connection is very important. So the way we dealt with it was to find statistical shortcuts. Now, that comes directly to the point of the Internet of Things, because the way we decided that we want to recommend a book, for example, was not by understanding the book, this is Amazon, but by noticing that if you read Harry Potter 1 and Harry Potter 2, perhaps you will read Harry Potter 3. That requires data. Doing statistics requires data, and data is very expensive to obtain. Data is very expensive to obtain. So our first shortcut was to replace a theory of the world and a theory of the user with a statistical pattern that the machine can discover. But that required data, and data must be obtained somehow. We decided to log every single choice the user makes to understand what they may want to do in the future. It used to be initially online behavior. What do you click, what you don't click. Today, we can log the position of the car and the behavior at home, because now the Internet of Things allows companies to be aware of when are you awake, when you're not awake, what you're eating, when the fridge is open, the entire set of data. That is a very strong motivation for Internet of Things to be created, to actually give an extra feed of data into the system. And also it provides actuators. That is how an intelligent system can act on the world, change the thermostat and so on and so forth. An intelligent system with a body, with the eyes, with the cameras, with the brain, so to speak, and the way to act upon the physical world. That is the next step, if you want. But what was the question again?
It was more on the limits of AI. So regarding,
I think we can talk about the limits at the end. It will take a while to get to the limits.
One last question. So you mentioned briefly Carl Sagan with your example. I think you were referring to Carl Sagan's signal to like extraterrestrial forms about the famous picture of like the hydrogen molecule and the human body and the form of data code. So
right.
In your book, you mentioned that even though you showed your cat this molecule, your cat couldn't understand the meaning of it. And you were saying that even though the cat does have some form of intelligence, this message was not stimulated his intelligence. However, my question is, don't you think that when we look for extraterrestrial forms of intelligence, we're looking for, and when we talk about forms of intelligence, we're talking about forms of intelligence similar to ours, so human-like forms of intelligence.
Well, that's the point we are making. That is the fundamental point we are facing. If we keep on looking for humans, we are going to miss the point. We are going to make the wrong laws, and we are going to be less safe. What we are building is not in any way human-like. We are not building a human. And that's not the detail. It's not like we are not building a human. And so Carl Sagan was trying to send a message. He was given a task. Talk to a general purpose intelligence in the universe, write something they can understand. And he thought, prime numbers, formaldehyde, hydrogen molecules, these are the fundamental principles of physics and mathematics. Any intelligent system evolved in the same universe has to understand those. And that was the message he sent. and no form of life on this planet, of intelligence on this planet. But not even Galileo would have known a molecule of hydrogen. Do you understand? He was looking for another brain of another physicist like him and me. But the point is the majority of intelligent systems are not physicists of the 20th century. And the machines we are building are not that. And for as long as we tried to build another theorem-proving logician, we failed. And now we gave up on that. So when you face GPT, and that's the next book So that's another question. I will answer in the next question. But those systems do converse with us in our language. They do demonstrate the ability to solve similar problems, but they understand the world in a fundamentally, profoundly different way.
Thank you very much. I will then give the floor to my colleague.
Yeah, Professor Cristianini, you've mentioned ChatGPT a couple of times, and I know probably most students here have some experience with the amazing program that is ChatGPT. It happens that you have a new book coming out, you said very shortly, called Machina Sapiens, talking about LLMs, ChatGPT in particular. And I was wondering if you could give us a little spoiler on that.
Well, first of all, this is the first time I say this in public, by the way. Thank you very much for calling me. The official launch is in Florence on March 20, but in Oxford, March 2nd. And then we have to talk with my colleague about Internet of Things. I want to hear about Internet of Things. Really, it's really important, actually. But the fundamental idea here is this. All this journey started with Alan Turing in 1950. Not far from here, because Bletchley Park is quite around down the road here, from here. And his beautiful paper starts with a beautiful line. I propose to consider the question, can machines think? That's the opening line of the paper. And he goes on to say, to avoid the philosophical discussions, I propose that we just treat as thinking a machine that can hold a conversation on any topic with anybody for as long as it takes without being recognized as a machine. If it can do that, let's just call it intelligent. Now, that's a very high test because a cat wouldn't pass it. It's a very high bar, but clearly, if you can do that, well, it's even harder than it should be. Yeah, that's for sure is intelligent. It's more difficult than what my cat does. But he was trying to avoid philosophical discussions. And he said, I think when we are going to build conversing machines, and we are going to, he thought by the year 2000, he was off 24 years. He said they are going to do other things too. Well, people tried to pass a Turing test. There was even a competition for 20 years called the Leibniz Prize, $100,000 for that machine. Nobody claimed the prize. And then they gave up and they discontinued the Leibniz Prize without any winner. Nobody could do that. And yet last year, all of us have been conversing with ChatGPT. And this Israeli company ran an online Turing test and found that 40% of participants couldn't recognize the machine. How did we get where we are? What can we expect next is a very important question, and that's my topic, but I will stop it here because we have to talk about Internet of Things as well.
Yeah, Professor Mandalari, you're an expert on Internet of Things, and you've talked about how we, either as a society or just in general, have been trading off comfort for security or for criticism. I want to hear about what you've found out about in your research, in your papers about the biggest dangers. And I also want you to frame the answer in the sense of what does an ordinary person have to worry about? We hear a lot about how big company data breaches are affecting the economy, but what does, say, a normal student going on their daily lives have to worry about when it comes to AI and IoT?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. This is basically my daily bread. Okay, so let me explain a little bit better what we do at UCL with our IoT laboratory. So when Internet of Things came out and the market exploded some years ago, everybody was really amazed at how you can do things using your smart speakers or Internet of Things. No one really thought about privacy and security threats of these devices. So these devices have sensors on them. Smart speakers have microphone, cameras can record you, television may watch what you are watching, And you may see a lot of news about, oh, Amazon is spying on us, Amazon workers are like listening what's it's happening in our house, but this wasn't demonstrated scientifically until 2018 when we published our first paper on information exposure on Internet of Things. So what we did in our lab here in UK, at UCL at Imperial and Northeastern University in Boston, we bought hundreds of IoT devices, from the cheapest one to the most expensive. We looked at them in our lab, and because we are like expert in networking traffic and internet traffic, we started to sniff the traffic that these devices were exchanging over the internet. And we also created a platform, a methodology for experimenting, doing experiments with these devices in an automated way. What did we discover? Well, where do I start? So there were various papers in which we demonstrate how they are treating your privacy. For example, smart speakers, we discovered that they were constantly misactivating. So even if you're not saying the wake word like Alexa or Hey Google, they were activating and starting recording your conversation and sending to the cloud to Amazon and Google, or Apple in the case of Amazon, in the case of HomePod. We discovered some unexpected behavior. Some doorbells were activating at each motion, even if the user did opt out for that in the app. We discovered televisions contacting third parties like Netflix, Facebook, other third-party services without even having an account for that services in your televisions. We discover an important matter that is try to understand where the servers of these devices were located, so where the data is going from the devices. And we compare, for example, the devices, same products that we had in the US and same product that we had in UK. We discovered that the data, the traffic from the UK lab are not going to the manufacturer, but to third parties, for example, and more than 50% of the destinations that these devices were contacted in UK and US were blockable. Like you can block them, the destinations of that specific, which are located in some specific countries, and still the devices was working. This means that were non-essential destinations used for other purpose. We discovered that the data, your data from the UK lab was going not in Europe, but in the majority of the time in US over the privacy jurisdiction, like for example, China. We discovered, so this is from the point of view of privacy, we discovered a lot of security vulnerabilities. We saw that, for example, one of the security vulnerability we discovered some weeks ago was about a TP-Link plug, in which in our case was like very, very easy to hack the app. Like literally my 8-year-old nephew could do it, and stole the password and the username for the user if you are in the same network as the user. We discovered common vulnerability exposure, like for example, the fact that for the 50% of the devices we have in the lab, if we have hundreds of them, you could do reply attack. That is a kind of attack in which you are just sniffing all the packets, replay the packets in the same network, and you can activating the devices even if you don't have access to the device. So these are the kind of things that we discover and the kind of threats. For understanding why the devices are actually acting like this, we needed to talk a little bit better how the business model of these devices is. So as you may know, most of the time, these devices are very cheap. So you go to Amazon nowadays, you can buy literally like, I don't know, smart camera for 20 pounds, right? This is even less than the cost of shipping the camera maybe from China until UK. So how they make money? How many of you knows how big tech make money? So what is the major revenue of Google, for example?
Selling data.
Yes, but why? Ads, advertisement. So 80% of the revenue of Google or the big tech is through advertisements. And do you know how an advertiser pay Google. So how Google computes how much I need to give them. Like if I want to like use Google for serving my advertisement. Do you know it?
Click on the ad.
Click. So the advertiser pay per click. So serving like an advertisement in a web page in which no one is clicking is not useful for Google. So what they do, they try to target you and serve the right advertisement to the right person in a way that you can click and they can make money. So how they can be sure that the right advertisement is served to the right person? Through something that we call profiling. And how you can profile someone, knowing as much as possible about you, about the user, about basically people that I want to serve the advertisement. And the Internet of Things is an extremely important source of data that can allow like this big tech to improve their profiling and then serving to you the right advertisement. And this is why in our lab nowadays, we are also talking and working a lot about cross-device advertisement. And the whole this process, the big discover how this kind of process is improving nowadays is thanks to AI algorithms. So AI in reality is now accelerating thanks to LLM, etc., but is used by Google since years and years. And is used for, in my opinion, the wrong reason, that is basically profiling the user.
Thank you so much. This actually plays really well into the next segment. So AI can profile us, gather our preferences, and it's everywhere thanks to the IoT. And how do you think, this is for both professors, how do you think AI, the fact that it suggests videos, the fact that it suggests ads, how do you think it is changing the way we make decisions? As these products are getting smarter and smarter, are we getting dumber? Or do you think that it is not happening?
I mean, you can take this.
Can I take this? But can I make a comment just because I was so impressed? When we face this situation we are going to describe, and we describe that we are a new technology and technology is a potentially problematic and so on, I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And we have two choices. And one is to just make a long essay in which we voice outrage and we're angry about it, and we list all the things we fear the most and say capitalism will ruin us. Or you measure them. That is such a simple thing, and it's so hard to convince people. We have an obligation to measure things. We are in the university. We need to establish the facts in a peer-reviewed, measurable manner and take the facts to the parliaments. That's what we must do. And I'm so happy to hear that you're doing exactly what we should be doing. We need to measure these things. There is no point in just having a general sense of there is a conspiracy against us. These big companies are doing something, we don't know quite what, but we feel something is wrong. I get this question a lot. I spent the last year traveling Italy after 28 years living overseas. The last year was my most Italian year of 28. And there is a general, I was surprised at what I found, the general sense of distrust against everything, politicians, institutions, companies, authorities, scientists. There's just general distrust I wasn't expecting. I think it doesn't take us far. Measure things. Write a report, establish your facts, give them to the parliament. I trust they know what to do with it. And that's for all of us. And this comes to the next point, which is now exposure. Imagine you put your child in front of YouTube and the child is trying to watch their cartoons. Now we have an interesting situation. YouTube needs to know what to recommend, how to maximize what they call engagement, participation, click-through. Why? We know exactly why. They are not a charity, they are not paid for. By the way, consider seriously the possibility that we should be paying the bill for web searches and for video. It is weird that we don't, because if we don't pay, then they have to pay the bills. And so the child is there, the machine is trying to figure out how to keep the child clicking. In theory, the machine could give you a form to fill. How do you define a funny movie? What is the definition of a good, interesting cartoon? Fill the form. But it doesn't work. People don't do it. The other option is to establish, and this is a behavioral economics, that you reveal your preferences by acting. That's, Samuelson, what's it? Basic economics. You reveal what you prefer by clicking. Revealed preferences. And the machine leverages that, the click. The click in context is better. And then, that the story is, we are going to find the thing that you prefer the most based on that. Now, if you were a pessimist, which nobody here is, you would say, well, this machine, it's a learning algorithm, is trying to find whatever thing makes you click the most. Are you revealing your preferences or are you revealing your weaknesses? Because another way to look at it is it's going to discover whatever it is that makes you click, that you can't resist. And that is, incredibly enough, personalized, meaning there is an individual model for every single user. This happens because, in the best possible of the worlds, you log into YouTube with your account. So they know you declared who you are, and they keep track. Cross-device is a good question, and that's a separate project. Just trust us. It is possible to know who you are, even if you haven't logged in. And you can do the same, and that's quite a concern, which can be measured and should be. What I want to measure also is the effect on the user, on the child in this case. First, playing that game with a reward function of a person. The primary intended goal, to get more clicks. Secondary, unintended goal, can it create some sort of addiction? Some people fear that. Have we measured it yet? Believe me or not, I haven't found it. Emotional well-being of Instagram users, mostly teenagers, mostly females. Lots of articles. Have they established scientifically there is an effect? I haven't seen that. And polarization, radicalization due to the internet filter bubble and echo chambers. Lots of claims, very few clear measurements. How can the parliament make a law and damage a company if there isn't a clear measurement? We have this to do right now. And then there is, and this is still not about mistakes of the producer, bugs in the software, or secret undisclosed behavior of the company. This is just the official intended declared goal. The company is maximizing clicks through this algorithm. And even that, a secondary effect we don't fully understand, and we should. And then there is the other concern. What if they don't tell us everything? But that would be illegal, right? So that's a different story, but it's interesting to know. Please.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. What are the real effects of profiling? It's not really clear. What it's very clear to me is that the user is not aware at all what the effects will be. So when I talk to a standard user and they listen to my research, they're always like, oh my God, this is crazy. But there is something that we call privacy paradox. That is when everyone is claiming to care about their privacy, but in reality, they do absolutely nothing for protecting about the privacy issues online. And so they say to me, okay, but who cares? I mean, I don't have anything to hide. I don't care if a random company in California have my data, why I should care. And the problem is not only about uniquely profiling you for serving you the right advertisement and monetize on your data, but also massive influence. Think about the Cambridge Analytica scandal, for example. If everybody knows about your preferences and your emotional status by your voice, for example, when you're speaking with your smart speaker, and it's very easy to know about what you wish and how you can be, in a way, influence massively about your vote, about your preference. But I agree with Professor Giesen that it's not demonstrative what the effects are yet.
Well, let's. I want to also end the bleak part of the talk because we don't want to depress people. There is a lot of positive stuff to say, but let's finish this bit because it's important. Fact. So now we are in the business school in Oxford, right? Sitting here. In the business school in Cambridge, they have conducted some studies which have been objectively well published and measured. So let's talk about those. That is David Stilwell's group and Kozinski. 2016, published on PNAS. Now we can't doubt, peer-reviewed like a normal scientist. Study number one. a bunch of volunteers, again, quotation marks, because volunteers, if you don't know, how can you give informed consent? You know, that's a big paradox we have. You consented to things you don't understand. But volunteers took a psychometric test online. And for many, many people, talking about hundreds of thousands of individuals, there is the psychometric profile, personality, and so on, plus personal data disclosed by the user. At that point, that group also went on their Facebook profile and harvested public behavior, meaning things they like, words they post. And they asked a very simple question. Is it possible to predict personal traits based on public behavior? The things you like, can they disclose, statistically speaking, information that is personal? The study was rigorous. I know nearly all of the people in that study, maybe 4 out of 5. And this is a serious study. They proved that you can infer private traits based on public behavior fairly reliably, meaning personality, sexual orientation, religious belief, political leaning, age, gender, whatever you want. Why? Because people who like Britney Spears and that show and this other show, most likely than not, are maybe have one gender or another, and so on and so forth. It was 2016. There was still Britney Spears. I'm sorry. And there was still Facebook. For those of you, Facebook is like TikTok for your parents. Okay. But at that point, they made a second study. If I knew the personality trait because I can infer it from the public behavior, can I use that to better target ads? That was not political ads. That was marketing ads. They were able to measure a click-throughs and conversion rates. Conversion rate is when the person does buy the product and click-through. And they were able to show that given 2 different ads, one for one type of introverts and extroverts, they did, for example, changing the wording and the images, they could increase the click-through and the conversion rates for introverts or extroverts, depending on. And it was reliable, but the effect was very, very small, significant. Statistically, great science, but small. Can this work in politics? Well, that hasn't been proven, but that effort is what gave rise to Cambridge Analytica. They took the same methodology and ideas and they applied it. And a big drama came out, which became a very confusing situation. I don't want to repeat, but it would be very interesting to know what is the extent to which one can move. But keep in mind, in some electoral systems, like the US one, just reducing turnout in some counties may be sufficient. This is not the case in Italy, where it's a very different system. In a purely majority system in the US, county by county, state by state, they can find swing states, swing counties, swing individuals, and they can start targeting those. And it's such a non-linear mathematics going on. We don't have that in Italy. So we should be careful, worry about something worrying and study the rest. It's very important. However, it is true that one can read your behavior, profile, psychological profiles, and to some extent, influence behavior. That has been, but the question is how much? And why don't we do this all the time? Why don't we do it on a big scale? It is such an important question. Now, if I can complete it before we go too far, keep in mind, the context is not just the things I clicked, because there is cross-device stuff. So the things I click on Amazon, so to speak, could influence the ads I see somewhere else, you know, and that's very important. Why? Because now the Internet of Things comes in. My machinery can just find out I stay up at night. Why? Because my fridge door keeps on opening and they know I'm awake at night every night. Then they may decide I may buy some products and not others because other people with that behavior have that preference. And that's still fairly innocent, one could say, until you realize that we haven't spoken about GPT and LLMs. We speak later, but that can feed into that story. So anyway, we have an obligation to know. I honestly tell you, I'm not outraged. I'm not angry. I'm not anything. I think the price of everything is vigilance. We are going to have to understand this stuff from now on. That's the way it is going to be.
Yeah, the user need to be aware. And there is a very nice example that I can give you about cross-device targeting from my IoT lab. It's about smart television. There is a new technology that will shock you. It's called automatic content recognition for smart television, ACR. What they do, even if you're not watching content from the, connected to the internet from the television, you're watching normal television, they, every interval of time, X interval of time, take screenshots of what you are watching, send to their cloud third-party ACR service, doing all the processing, image processing using AI, and then serving to you the right advertisement to the same profiling you're using in another device, that is your laptop, your phone, or other platform connected to your account of Samsung television, for example, or LG. And then basically using what you're watching for profiling you in other platforms, smartphone or laptop, for example. This is a good example of how cross-devices targeting is used nowadays using Internet of Things. And I'm sure that if I ask you how many of you knows that your television is using ICR, no one knows, right? But as soon as you switch on the television, you have this wonderful 40 pages of terms and conditions that no one read. I don't, to be honest. I think no one of you. And in that terms and condition, it's written that ICR is used and is also used for using cross-device targeting. So what happened is that nowadays, it's illegal to do this stuff if the devices is not telling you that they're doing these things, because we are in Europe and in Italy, luckily for us, and we have something wonderful that is called GDPR. So basically, they tell you that they're doing this. But what is missing in this moment is making this easier for the user to understand. So awareness is what is missing nowadays about cross-devising AI and IoT in general.
Let's not scare everybody off. Let's say something really helpful.
Yes.
Yeah. Is leaving because we are the first. Sorry about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It is not our intent to rain on AI's parade. And I'm sure that once we talk about the impacts of AI on the economy and how it affects productivity, people will realize that AI is, something positive. Before we move on to Italy and how AI affects the economy, we've talked a lot about how AI's results and AI's impact is influencing users, but we haven't talked about how AI comes to those results. And here's where, Dr. Cristianini, I want to hear about ChatGPT and LLMs. And in particular, the average user, for example, uses ChatGPT and the answer is almost like magic. It appears on the screen. I want to understand how AI produces those results for users, how data biases and data quality in training those algorithms affects the result that it produces. And in particular, for example, other than ChatGPT, we could comment Google Gemini, as it has been recently in the news. Yeah, it's the same. Yeah.
So here is the story. The first thing we must say very, very clearly is, I don't know all of it. Nobody really fully understands all of it. And that sounds crazy, but I will explain. When we apply an algorithm that we made to data that we don't fully understand, the interaction can be complicated. So we did write the algorithm, but then the algorithm has been allowed to read an immense amount of web, and the resulting output we don't understand very well. So let me tell you the story. In 2017, a group of Google researchers published an interesting paper with an algorithm that was meant to facilitate machine translation. So it was generating text, reading French and generating English. So it's called a transformer. It was very interesting machinery for a task that we take for granted these days. People are trying to make it faster and more scalable and so on. The next year, a very small startup in California who was doing something entirely different until that moment, they decided to apply half of that machine to the problem of modeling language, generating language, and understanding statistically language. The transformer was trained on text. Its task was very simple and very confusing in a way. I take a document like this page, I delete some, I realize I need to point a bit, tells me next week I need to prepare slides. If you delete some random words, then you ask the algorithm, can you predict the missing word based on the context? The machine will try and fail, then you will disclose the correct word, and the machine can update its weights, its parameters. Okay, A machine can play this game forever on a vast scale, on hundreds and thousands of graphical processing units, and then at some point, weeks later, become good at it. The machine that can start guessing very well the missing words, for some reason, acquires knowledge of language and knowledge of the world that can be used for other applications too, because we really don't really need the machine to predict the missing words that we have deleted ourselves. That is not what we really want. The machine is evolving other abilities, which include completing syllogisms, translating, summarizing, paraphrasing, answering questions, and so on. So having said that, seen that, all the companies started developing larger and larger and larger. It was clear that the larger is the machine and the larger is the training set, the more accurate is this emergent abilities. So there are three levels. The algorithm, transformer, producing a model of language, GPT, and the model of language being the engine for a chatbot, ChatGPT. So we had the same in Google. The transformer is producing, in those days, it used to be called Lambda, and Lambda was feeding Bard. Then they made Palm feeding Bard, and then they made Gemini feeding Bard. Now Gemini is feeding Gemini, and so on. And then there is Grok, and then there is, Mistral. They're all the same. You train a transformer on text, and then you make a model that can have emergent abilities. We are studying actively, very fast, everybody, how on earth and what can we expect next. So this is not fully stable, but we know the abilities emerge. The text you put into the machine is called the prompt. You can make a very long prompt, and then the machine can give you an appropriate answer sometimes, often, very often. You can add a hidden prompt to it if you want, which can be the rules of the game. You don't have to see it. The company can say, answer the following question without using any rude words or anything racist or anything, whatever, and here is the question of the user. In this way, they convince the machine not to produce the content. The hidden prompt doesn't have to be necessarily text or .text. You can have a prompt that is the Internet of Things, my entire history of my geographical locations for 6 months. And given this prompt, the person is asking, where is pizza? Well, now I know quite a lot. Where are you right now? Where have you been yesterday? Well, the best pizza for you is now. Yeah. You understand that context can now be leveraged for users. And this is not for training, it's for users. So these kind of GPT machinery, the large language are very interesting. They come as an extra layer on top of the previous things. What we built until a few years ago was very interesting. I propose it's useful to look at them as social machines. Mm-hmm. The behavior of YouTube depends on the behavior of 2 billion users, mediated by the algorithm to recommend a video. So it's not just an algorithm. Again, it's all these people interacting with each other, with the content, with the machine, and the machine is using all of that to recommend to me the next video. It is not just the mathematics of the algorithm. Well, on top of that, now there is a new layer that can sort of generate text. And it does it very well. When you feed to it admissions exams for American universities, and then you give the output, the blind, peer-reviewed, unknown, anonymized, the machine passes the admission test every time. It works. Now you can say, well, this is not understanding. Yeah, but when the machine is completing the diagnosis of a patient based on the symptoms correctly, is it different than understanding? So we are facing this new situation. Machine, we don't fully understand whose data it was, what is the effect on people. All that is very interesting. But first, before we go into outrage mode, let's stop for a second. This is something that Alan Turing was trying to do, the conversation game, the imitation game, the Turing test. For a long time, he would have said this machine is thinking by that definition. It is passing the test. And other abilities are emerging. This is a very interesting and important moment in the history of this field, this year.
Great. Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. Yes. So sorry, what was the question?
How data biases and data quality in training these algorithms.
And Italy is actually very good at this, because if you remember some months ago, the Italian Data Protection Authority blocked OpenAI because it wasn't very clear how personal data was used for training the algorithms that are giving to us the output. Now, as a computer scientist, can I say that it's impossible for OpenAI to answer to this question? Because when you're training an LLM model and you're giving as an input some data, you don't know how those data are used or if they are used for giving you the output that they're giving to you. So it's basically a mess. What I'm saying is that it's very complicated for OpenAI to reply to this answer. The only way that we can prevent to use personal data for training this algorithm is basically use prevention. So I don't know if you heard the news about Google do a partnership with Reddit. And Reddit, Google is now paying Reddit for getting all the conversation of users in the platform for training their LLM algorithm. I think this is extremely dangerous, not only because the personal data and personal conversation of users that for sure they're public, so everybody can access it, can feed these algorithms, but also because it's very likely that the outputs that Google will give us by training their algorithms using this data are the possibility that would be highly biased are very high. Why? Because Reddit users have like a very specific profiles. They come for usually a specific country. They have a specific, they usually have a specific race. Arguments in Reddit are more or less always the same, same preferences. So this is how it comes that an algorithm can be biased. So an algorithm can be biased by the input data that are used for training it. And this is very well-known problem from AI since it was born or since advertisements was used, for example. So there are some colleagues at Northeastern University that are working on understanding how biases the advertisement give to you and why this is a problem. Let's say that, for example, you come from a minority group. So minority group in STEM, for example, is women. Everybody knows this. So if you're using the wrong data for training algorithms for serving advertisement about education to women, it's most likely, and it was demonstrated, that the advertisement that a woman will get is to go to business school of laws, for example. And this is in contrast with what the humanity is trying to achieve, that is getting more women in STEM. And the algorithms that are wrongly trained, thanks to the wrong data, are not actually helping this. So this is a good example how data or algorithms can be biased nowadays.
Thank you very much. We would love to talk more about the ethics of AI. However, this is the Italian Symposium, so we have to talk about it a little bit. So the first question is, it starts from a fact. I feel we can all agree that Italy and Europe are quite behind in terms of AI. So what do you think are some policies that the Italian government should implement so that we become competitive again in terms of AI and Internet of Things research?
Yeah, I think that this is extreme important moment for Europe and Italy in general. It's like the industry revolution. So we need to jump on it immediately. And I would say that Italy, against all of the maybe opinions, is the right country to do AI at the moment. And I'm not the only one thinking about it. Think about the Professor Goblots, that it was exactly from Oxford University, that decided to go to Paola in Calabria because of he was thinking that will be the future, the region in which AI will develop in the future. And I actually agree with it. And also being in the Secretariat's Committee for Strategy of AI, we had the possibility to talk about how Italy can push, particularly for creating startups for artificial intelligence, or how our education program can be established around artificial intelligence. And in particular, my personal opinion is that because of the Italian Data Protection Authority started this thinking about data protection and safety AI, ethical AI, Italy can become like a point of reference for Europe about safety. In the UK, for example, 2 weeks ago was created this AI Safety Institute. I think in Italy we should, and the same was done like in Europe last week. And I think that Italy would be the right country for guide the rest of Europe for safety and AI ethical in AI. I think this will be like the right topic for Italy to lead in Europe.
Well, it's a good, for me, it's more than a prediction. I have this as a wish. So I wish you are right. I hope it happens. If you ask me what I expect, that's not a fair question, but I wish this happened.
Thank you very much. And just a follow-up question. Recently, Mario Draghi in his report about Europe competitivity mentioned that one of the main problems of Europe right now, of the European Union, is that research funding comes mainly from state funds rather than private investors, while in the US, the same amount of funding comes from the state, but then double the amount comes from private investors, therefore making the US more competitive in terms of funding. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel donation policies in universities in Europe and the UK are more strict than in the US. So do you think donation policies should become more loose?
Which policies?
Donations to investments, yes.
Well, first of all, you must have a donor because, you know, the donations, you know, I'll take them, but it doesn't mean that I'll get them, right? So, but that shows how difficult the job it is for the parliaments in this moment. It's easy to criticize everybody all the time, but if you're a parliament right now, you have, on the one hand, your citizens, 500 million of them, with values that they really care about, and they want them to be respected. On the other hand, you have your industry, who is competing on a global stage with other countries that have different values. And now you have a choice. Do I want to prevail? Do I want my industry to succeed? And what do we do with it? The fundamental fuel of all this, which is personal data and so on, or if I want to put my values first, and then of course another company can, and that's very, and by the way, if you don't win the race, you are just going to be a rule taker from another country who made their own devices, because you're going to have to use the devices anyway. That is not an easy place to be, and the game is very complicated. I'm actually impressed. The parliament in Europe came up with a 4-tier risk system in which on the low levels, we can compete in a fairly free way, but as soon as you apply this machinery to some specific domains, then you have all these regulations. The effort was, can we allow at least some layers to compete, you know, fairly in it? It is not going to be easy. But one thing to be said is this, that is really important. You know, I was lucky because I'm not very young, to be honest. I met some of the pioneers of this field. I met John McCarthy, who invented the term artificial intelligence, you know. And I spoke with them, and they're telling me a story of all of them, of very idealistic people who wanted to do something really remarkable, solve the mystery, scientists, solve the mystery of intelligence and understand how things work, you know. No one of them ever for a second thought that the business model would be advertising. So this thing happened by a series of coincidences, and now the field is funded mostly by advertising. During the Cold War, it was funded mostly by the military. Now it's funded mostly by advertising. We should consider maybe other revenue models that are more sustainable for European industry, because advertising is essentially personalization, and it is heavily regulated and so on. And that's going to be an interesting challenge. It is not a scientific one, it's a political one. I don't know how an entrepreneur in Italy can honestly make another large language model, and I don't expect it, to be honest. And that's I don't have an answer to that. We are where we are, and we made a choice, and our values do matter a great deal to us. But at least we can understand. We must understand. We can make regulations. I think the world are going to follow our regulations largely because they're fast and clear and very early on. Whether we can build specialized models for specific applications, maybe trained just on scientific papers and books and not on public discussion boards, that is an interesting question. I think there is a space there. What do you learn anyway from Reddit? Just the style. Of course, the style is important in a dialogue, but the factual information doesn't really come much from Reddit. You learn, okay, the meaning of words, semantics, phrase formation. You learn a lot of information that is useful, Maybe you can learn that from the screenplays of movies and theater plays and sitcoms, perhaps. Then the factual information could come from somewhere else. I agree that just training the machine on the free web comes with risks, both because we don't understand it very well and because the privacy issues aren't clear. But keep in mind what our guarantee of privacy said is quite serious, because as I just mentioned earlier on, the only reason why AI works is because it's based on statistics and it's trained on massive amounts of data. It wouldn't work otherwise. There would be no AI without massive data and statistics. So when the document of the Garante came out and they said, well, we can't allow GPT in Italy, ChatGPT, because there is no guarantee the answer is accurate, and it might be using personal data scraped from the web, it was essentially two of the shortcuts gone. Without those 2 points, statistical, in fact, what was the solution in the end? They put a footnote with a disclaimer, and the machine was back up next month. Same machine with a disclaimer. So if this is what we think is the role of the parliament, I'm concerned. Are we just going to put disclaimers, or are we going to affect the way things are developed? There is no solution if we don't understand the machine.
Yeah, I think that was the only thing that they could do, because at the moment there were no regulations on it. There are no regulations at the moment, but with the AI Act, this will be different, hopefully.
Yeah, that is a question about why they did it, and I don't want to go into speculation, of course,
Yeah.
why did it. But the constructive approach is understanding the technology, finding a space for us, investing heavily. And by the way, yeah, donations are great if you find them. The revenue is not donation. The revenue for universities is not very high. The revenue is not very high in America. It is really the companies right now that are leading that show. They have labs here too, by the way, those companies. There are labs in Cambridge for all these companies. Of course, DeepMind is based in London, although they belong to Google, and they're developing a lot of interesting technology. So it's not like Europe doesn't act. It's more like European Union, maybe Italy, culturally. And that, I think, touches on the structural, traditional weaknesses of our system, and that it would be nice to heal. That would be nice to heal.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we close this panel with this sort of open question to the future of AI. I would like to thank Professor Mandalari and Professor Cristianini for coming all the way to Oxford this afternoon. And thank you everyone for coming.
Can I ask?
Yeah, we'd like to open the floor for questions. Very
Thought the panel was closing, so okay. Thank you very much for your thought-provoking speech. My name is Tommaso, and I'm a student at the LSE and Peking University in China. And I'd like to ask 2 questions, so feel free to answer both of them, both of you. And the first one is, you might be aware of the case of Edward Snowden in the US, also because one of the main newspaper which talked about this was the UK, the Guardian in the UK, where he leaked document giving evidence of the fact that the National Security Agency, which is a federal institution in the US, was recording and listening to the recordings of US citizens. So my first question is, does your research include, this link between government and the search of information from citizens? And I think this is really scary for me because it's a matter of chi supervisione supervisori, in the sense that we would expect our governments to protect our privacy, but then our government takes this data from us. For, I don't know, in that case, there were clear purposes of terrorism because it happened after 9/11. But if you could expand on this.
Thank you.
And the second question, really quickly, you mentioned about this link between understanding private behavior from public behavior. I wanted to ask whether you could do the opposite way round, so understanding public behavior from private behavior, because I've read, you mentioned Cambridge Analytica case. I've read a book which is called La dittatura dei dati, Brittany Kaiser, and she argued that 70 likes can tell something about a person more than your mother actually knows about you.
Or more than you knowing about you.
Yeah, exactly. So if you could expand on this.
Yeah,
Thanks.
okay, I will do the first. There is really a very fine limit between protecting us from privacy and security threats and surveillance. And an example of this is a new tool that is coming up in Europe that is about online age verification. Particularly for some services online that are, for example, porn services. So there are some regulations, even in Italy, Spain, but in Europe in general, about understanding if you are less than 14 years old and trying to limit the access to kids to particular online services. How can we do this? The only way you can do this is like providing your ID for accessing particular services online and prove your age, right? And this is what Europe proposed, or someone in Spain proposed. And obviously the question here is, okay, you're trying to protecting us, but then the services will have all the ID documents of all Italians accessing Pornhub and knowing exactly when and what they're doing in the platform. So this is a paradox, because from protecting, you are in reality creating some sort of surveillance. The solution to this will be technology. So we are computer scientists, and we know that technology can help between finding a trade-off between privacy and security and surveillance by using some technologies that are called, for example, confidential computing, differential privacy. I don't know, I can come here and list lots of technologies that we can use for trying to understand the access to some services without reveal who is actually accessing that service. So I would say that if governments wants to avoid the surveillance, but also enhance security and privacy, there are technology nowadays for which it's possible to do it. For answering your question about trying to limit the fact that some governments can spy on us by using, for example, IoT devices and other stuff, for scientists and researchers, it's impossible to know that, because once the data are like leaving your home, and so how internet works is that it's an open network. So your data, your traffic is going from your home to your internet service provider, and then no one knows where. And is crossing various, basically, we call autonomous system, and then going finally to the server where the devices wanted to talk to. And it's not possible from client side, so from the devices, me, researcher observing the devices, knowing once the data are leaving my lab, knowing what's happening in the server, because the server is another machine located somewhere else in the internet, and I cannot access remotely that server. So it's not possible to know scientifically what will happen once the data are leaving your machine, your laptop, phone, or whatever.
Now I'm depressed. What was the question again? It was about public behavior. So this is just my position is I always try to talk about science and not opinions, because I feel this is my space. You know, having seen the pandemic in Italy in particular, I think scientists, I want to be talking about the things I do understand. So that's an interesting scientific point. If you collect for a person a set of properties, features, behaviors, and then another set. So you could have the demographics and then perhaps the voting preferences, for example. Then an interesting question is, are they redundant? Are they independent of each other or not? Now, if they were independent, we wouldn't be able to do pretty much any personalized medicine or any marketing. Everybody is just behaving randomly. Of course, they're correlated. Some children will watch cartoons and some grown-ups will watch something else because they are different demographics. We use that all the time. So can you predict behavior based on properties and vice versa? And the answer is, of course you can. You do it every single day. More generally, if you want to abstract, we have the issue of the Rosetta Stone. I call it in my first book. You have a piece of text you do understand, ancient Greek, and a piece of text you don't understand, hieroglyph. And now you want to find a mapping between the two. And once you find the mapping, you can start translating a new text that was not bilingual. Yeah. So you could be collecting everybody's public behavior on Facebook. In the billions now there are. You could be doing that. You can then obtain some personal private information for a sample of them. And once you find the mapping, you can predict the private behavior for everybody else. And that is the Cambridge Analytica idea. I can predict voting intentions based on public activities. It can work both ways. Normally, you try to predict the expensive information based on the cheap one. You know, if you know location of a person, then you will try to predict what they may want to buy. You know, if you are in front of the stadium, the football stadium, you will put one type of poster for publicity, and if you're in the university, a different poster. We do it all the time. The question is, do you need consent for it? Do people want to allow it? Do you want to keep a mathematical model? And here is an interesting concept, if you want to hear it. I want you to follow me in this idea, and it relates to the privacy. You can do segmentation of the market, males, females, old and young. That's a coarse segmentation. Then you can do more refined segmentations, 25-year-old males from Pordenone. And then you go closer and closer down to people who did the Liceo Classico. And you still have groups of thousands of people, but they all have the same age and school background and town and whatever. That's called micro-targeting. It can be demographic, or it can be behavioral. You could say people who have bought this product and they own a Tesla and they go to the Milan match every other Sunday, they are a subset also. That's a behavioral targeting, not a demographic targeting. If you do profiling to the extreme, you're left with one person. That is called identification. You can do profiling short of identification. You're left with a homogeneous group. Postcode in the UK, geographically, or everybody in your class, or whatever you want. At which point you want to stop the profiling and the micro-targeting is a decision that you can make. You can go all the way down. That's you. How many likes do you need? It's very simple mathematics. You know, if you are anybody studied information theory, you know, information theory is a piece of mathematics, very, very elegant. And how many bits you need to find an element in a set? An element with a set with n elements needs log n bits. So if you do the logarithm of n, and that's the number of bits you need. 70 likes is plausible because a like is not a bit. A like is plenty of bits. You know, you can like many things. You choose to like one. So every single like is lots of bits. 70 likes is very plausibly sufficient to identify a single person. Nobody else liked all of these things. And by the way, that is also how we do cross-device identification, because you can check in my browser, all the apps are installed, and only I have installed all those apps. Nobody else has. That's me. That's my signature. And that's how you know people across. But stopping short of identification allows you to do plausible deniability. You can't use it in a court of law. You probably believe this is the person who has done all of that because there is only 10 of them, but you can't prove it. Is this enough? In a democracy, it is enough. You find 5 people. One of them is guilty of not paying taxes. You know which one is which. You can't do anything with it. The other countries, you can make a very simple scheme. If you're in a dodgy country, if you want, you can make a specific ad targeted to Facebook users whom you believe might be homosexual. They will receive the ad. Facebook is not playing along. They don't cooperate with you. You still do it. And that ad contains a link to your pages. Only those individuals who Facebook believes that may be homosexuals, only they will click to your page, where you can now put a pixel to track them. These games can be played all the time without cooperation from the platform. You can do it, but that's another depressing topic. So the question is, how much do we want to trust? What I want to get to is the notion of trust. Trust. Because we don't go far. You cannot prove all the time conclusively that nothing bad will happen. How do we handle trust in society? That is not a software engineering topic, but we must mention this. Thank you, Tommaso. This is an important question.
Yeah.
How do you enter in a restaurant and have a meal and trust that you will not die? Because the chef could potentially be crazy and dangerous and incompetent and hate you, and they could poison you, but you still go to the restaurant. Because we invented a system to make trust a rational position. It is rational to trust because, I'll be brief, but it's very important because it solves a lot of discussions and paranoia and conspiracy theories. Trust is a serious business. We trust people all the time. Competence and benevolence of the chef. Is he competent or is she competent? Well, there are certifications. They studied in the chef school. I trust the school because somebody is checking the chef school and the teachers, and then their students have been approved by the school. They have the knowledge. Are they benevolent? Well, I don't know if they hate me or not, but let's make sure that it is rational for them to be benevolent because there is the police and there is a system to hold them accountable. And if they did something like this, they would pay high cost. There is an ecosystem of checking and checking those who check and checking the hygiene institute and the police. And the entire ecosystem of trust makes it rational for me to go to the restaurant and makes the economy work. That ecosystem will exist at some point for AI and for the Internet of Things. It just doesn't yet. There's going to be jobs, not of engineers, of other people, social scientists, who will develop the ecosystem of trust for that. But the solution is not to make the machine bulletproof and mathematically impossible to trick it. It is always possible. But we are in society, we have laws and norms and beliefs and culture. Just the technology has been moving very fast right now. And when things move very fast, for a short time, it becomes possible to do legally something indecent. And may I say, sorry to sound crazy, that is where the notion of integrity comes in. That is you in front of your own mirror every day, as a scientist, as a teacher, as a parent, as whatever you want to be. Laws cannot always prevent you from doing something stupid and illegal. You can. Sorry.
Hi, I just wanted to ask and know your thoughts about the current discourse on open source versus closed AI, looking at, for example, OpenAI and open frameworks like OpenLlama. And then when it comes to the new kind of type of digital warfare, looking at like deepfakes and image generation, what can be done from a government perspective on that? Thank you.
Yeah, I will just follow what you said about certification. So this is for your second question. So basically, at the moment, everybody can do OpenAI. This is how it was called because it was open, right? And the business model is now changing and mostly degrading. But a good way for governments to control it is certification. And a good way to do it is through the AI Act. Same for Internet of Things devices. We have the Cyber Resilience Act, in which we will have like score system for Internet of Things, in which before something is going to the markets needs to be scored by this certification framework. And the same can happen for AI algorithms. So you will have this certification scheme in which you have like level of risk, and deepfake obviously will be one of the ones that will be with highest risk. One of the tools that we have nowadays for avoiding all this is awareness on the user. So I received a lot of messages from my dad with some fake news of fake video and telling me like, oh, I received this. What do you think about this? And it's obvious that it's fake, right? Because I'm aware that this is a risk, that this technology is there. I can create something that is fake like that. And it's the same for fake news in social media, for example. So awareness to the user can be one of the tools for which we can avoid deepfake and phishing using deepfake, for example, and other scams like this.
About fake news, well, I have my, but there is a notion of critical thinking. Critical thinking is not what some believe. It is not about being critical of others. It is not about finding flaws in everything. It's not about rejecting everything. Critical thinking is assessing evidence and deciding, do I believe it or not? It's like food. Do I eat this or not? And during the pandemic, we witnessed a lot of media people telling us that I don't believe any authorities, any scientist, I'm a critical thinker. That is an idiot. It's not a critical thinker. Anybody can accept everything or reject everything without a line of Python, without any brain power. You can just reject everything. The problem is case by case deciding. That's critical thinking. And there are instruments for that. There has always been this question in science and the humanities. And there is an interesting point. How do you educate people to be critical thinkers? You are historians. A historian compares different sources, understands, and decides. Scientist repeats, decides. There are methods of critical thinking. And there will not be an algorithm unless, I learned my algorithm in my high school in Gorizia, in Liceo Classico in Gorizia. Thank you, my teachers. You think critically about evidence. But there will not be a mathematical solution. But again, just like before about personal integrity, it is our obligation to get to the point when we can understand enough to be critical thinkers.
Your opinion on whether we should remain open source or if we should consider closed source?
I think this is becoming boring now because you are challenging me to be boring, and I will be. So, and every boring conversation starts with, we must distinguish. So we must distinguish. The software algorithm is open source. The transformer algorithm has always been open source. And yet it doesn't matter. GPT-2 is open source, and my students are training it. We play all the time. That's public. It's published, the article, the mathematics, and the code from day one. So how about the data? Well, the data is coming from the web. That's open source. So wait a second. Then the models. Well, Meta is releasing Llama code all the time. Being open source is no guarantee of much, to be honest. And the question is, what do we want to do with it? Do you want to audit it? Well, then maybe you can just have a simple authority sitting someplace in Brussels auditing software like they're auditing medicines, drugs, the authority for that. Yes, there are cases. I studied carefully the Compass drama in the US when this software was accused of being racist, and it went very far, and the company producing the software never wanted to release the code, which would have solved the conversation. Here's the code. My colleagues went as far as reverse engineering the machine, found their data, getting pretty close to the conclusion that the machine was not discriminating. But we don't know because the company never released the code. And they say we can't release it because it will be used badly by competitors or by persons with ill intentions. Well, my answer is give it to the authorities, make them sign a non-disclosure agreement, let them audit it. So open source, I don't know. Do you want to disclose to the authorities? Maybe you should. Just like you disclose your paperwork for the vaccines and for the other medicines. Do you want to disclose to everybody? I don't know. Would you really want every single spammer and hacker in the world to know the details of the Google ranking system and the spam filter? Well, then they will use them to spam you more. But somebody must know. Maybe not everybody. So that is not so clear-cut that everybody should know everything all the time, by definition, because we live in a world where some individuals are not going to play along. But the authorities that we trust must create an ecosystem of trust, have the institutions who check, and then you trust the institutions. And if you start distrusting them, then you're in trouble, then you're back to 2021 in Italy, in which some people couldn't trust even anybody. And that's a bad way to wake up in the morning, where you don't trust your teachers, your newspapers, your TV, your politicians, your government. How do you live that day?
Or one more question.
Hi, thank you for the speech. It's been very interesting. I have a question about another ethical aspect of AI, which is the impact on the workforce. What do you see in the future? Because nowadays we are seeing AI that is substituting workers in some fields, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. I don't know if it's a problem. It surely it makes a very impactful difference in the world we are seeing today. And for instance, I see that 20% of the world population works in agriculture, which is very easily, I don't want to say substitutable, but AI-powered robots could do it. Manufacturing is 15%, and there is a lot of other fields that could be substituted. So do you think that AI should be regulated in this sense? What should be done? And what we as humans can do in the future if none of us can work?
This is like a philosophical question and more for economists, but I think in Italy it's actually great because we are zero growing nation. So, I mean, someone will need to do the job at some point, right? And no, seriously. So I think that this is like I repeat again this concept. This is like the industry revolution in which we were scared about what technology could do to the work environment. It's very true that AI can take and do some jobs that nowadays are done by human, but it's also very true that most of my friends that have startups or tech companies cannot find expert on this. So it's not like that there won't be jobs for humans, but it's like that it's like we are converting, we are changing the way we are working. And it's true that this can be a problem that cannot be really predict at the moment. But some of the things that will happen can be prevented from government for sure.
Yeah, so this is a good question. I hear it a lot. I get this question because it is one of the few constant questions I had in the last year, which means people have this clearly in mind, much more so than all the other in academic circles. People will ask me about fairness, equality. In the outside world, it's that. What about my job next 10 years? And I think it's a fair question. And I have this idea that to be very, very, very blunt, the purpose of automation is to replace people. And we are talking about automation here. I am blunt because we are in the university and we are not primary school children, we are grown-ups. We are dealing with automation here. So we are going to replace people. The question is the pace of automation and disruption of society. And the pace is very fast indeed. And that creates interesting problems. A school teacher in my parents' times would have known exactly what to teach in the primary school children because that is the same thing they taught to the world was the same. My grandparents grew up in Tuscany in the 1920s or 10s, and the world was exactly the same world as their parents. So you keep on repeating that word. You teach those things, learning, reading, writing, count. Teachers today have no idea what you will need, not you, your children will need 10 years in the future. They don't know. So it's very scary. The worst fear is the fear of the unknown. And we don't know very well what's coming. Of course, people are anxious for their own job, but mostly for what's there. My personal advice is knowing and understanding is a very good remedy for the fear of unknown. There's a lot we can learn and know. Things maybe are moving a little fast in terms of jobs. But the point of agriculture you made is very good. Agriculture is now 20% in the world, and in some countries it's like 10% or less. Agriculture is a small part of employment. It used to be everybody. So what happened? Other jobs came. We may be optimistic, something will come. And you're asking me, what if it doesn't come? What do we do if not everybody's work is needed? And we know our country has the constitution, and the first opening line, which one is it? We are a democratic republic founded on work, on labor. So do we expect everybody's labor will be needed until the end of time? That's a very good question. I don't think it's coming very soon. This generation will be fine, but the theoretical question is there. It used to be that the owners of the means of production, all the classical theories. Well, the owners of the means of production, will they have to be responsible for? So I don't have answers, but I can tell you these are not software engineering questions.
I agree.
But that is why we need everybody in the room. That is why but we can't have the economist or the psychologist in the room. I mentioned before the psychologists or the politicians, if they don't understand the machines. I can tell you that most of the people I meet, politicians and journalists and economists, have the best of intentions, and they still have in mind the idea of AI they learned from Hollywood with the 2001 especially. Our job is to make sure we have a simple explanation of what we are doing, because they need to know it very well, because it will be them and you to make these laws, which are needed, not to this generation, but to the next one. And it will not be me. That's all I can say.
I have one last question, actually, which is you just have to answer really briefly. You don't need to be long. But yesterday we had Matteo Renzi at the Italian Symposium, and he discussed about the importance with the coming of AI of having a different kind of education where we learn about the classics, where we learn about philosophy, where we learn about culture. Because that's probably what AI wants to do. That's his claim. What do you think about that? Do you think that perhaps...
Can you repeat?
It's not clear the question.
Can you repeat? So are you, sorry, not you.
Yeah.
Is Mr. Renzi claiming that studying classics is a different type of education for Italians?
No, he's claiming that he would invest in that to train people to think differently from AI, to have a different critical reasoning, to have more critical reasoning than now. He would double that, right? We already study a lot of classics, but he said that's where we would need to go.
I want to be second, because
I
want to always be speaking, always me. You need to be speaking.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you, that connects to your answer, right? Because we need politicians, journalists, economists, psychologists to understand what's the machine, what does the machine do. So yeah, I wanted to understand what you thought about that.
I didn't understand very well the question. It's about like copyright or creativity?
No, it's more about what should people learn. The Italian education system is already centered around classics, around humanities.
Okay, the future education of Italy about AI. Yes, so this is very important, and it's like something that I notice teaching here in UK against like when I go and do seminars in Italy. I really think that the Italian students are the best, because this is like not because of you, but really because we are used to fight for like finding our place, and because we're used to study things in depth, right? So I remember when I studied in Italy, so I studied engineering, telecommunication, computer science in Italy, and for each exam I needed to do theory and understand every single theorems and do practice. Here, what they do just the practice part. And is this working? When they go out and find a job and looking for a job, are they better than Italians? Yes, they do, because they do practical stuff. So I think we shouldn't lose our identity and our culture, because studying classical literature, Italian literature, help a lot of critical thinking. But I think that in Italy, we really need more practical stuff in university and school. But also when we learn about languages, for example, right? Is the way we are used to teach in Italy that needs to change. So I think we need to do something, but not too much practical things, how is happening outside Italy, find a trade-off between not losing our identity and learn the history of our country, and then be in the same way practical with things in university and schools.
That's very good. question, and I understand it. So you are, if I understand correctly from the explanations, is Mr. Renzi suggests that in a new world where the machines are doing a set of tasks, humanistic culture will not be replaced, and that can be part of employment as well. Who knows? I don't know about employment, but I do know that we discussed a lot about critical thinking and making sense of things and understanding. And there is no doubt in my mind that the way I think is shaped by my 5 years of classic studies. There's no discussion, you know. And in a country that is not Italy, I would encourage all the students, spend your time on the classics of your own culture. It doesn't have to be my culture. The other classics, right? Take them seriously. You know, language must be understood all the way, and philosophy all the way. And then, yeah, maybe it wouldn't hurt to know other people. By the way, it doesn't hurt anybody to know other cultures too, but know your own. What I did say in Italy is a bit different. And I'm in a strange place here because there are many Italians, but we are overseas. I don't know what to say anymore. Science should be taken more seriously in my high school. It wouldn't break my high school to have more hours of math. I could still do my art history and my philosophy and my whatever. It wouldn't die no one if I did more math and more physics. I don't know why that is so difficult to understand. And still do my Greek. So science is very important because where we are falling behind economically is in STEM. And that is fundamental. It is not just the technical vocational aspect of fixing the machine that breaks. That is not the point. It's understanding what's going on today is a scientific question. Sorry to be critical of people, never critical, I try to not be, but allow me one. If our media and politicians understood what an exponential actually is, imagine the pandemic, how difficult it would be. For most people in Italy, exponential growth means fast. Well, the virus is spreading exponentially. Everybody should be in the basement hiding, right? It's exponential. That was not understood. Why? Because you can't even tell them, oh, that's a function with the derivative is another exponential. They don't know what is derivative or a function. And that's a concern, not being able. And I find myself having to face beautiful audiences in Italy all the time, and I am so happy to face them. And they ask me good questions, and I can't answer because I empathize with them, and they are lacking the words. And I think, why are they lacking the words? Why can't I say function in public? It's embarrassing. So the point of having two cultures is a flaw, not only in Italy. It is not true that there is a choice between humanistic and scientific culture. Of course, it is not a choice. Of course, the scientific revolution and scientific thinking, by the way, started in, I don't want to say Galileo, but you know, it's based on the humanistic revolution. Humanism was the foundation of the scientific revolution in Italy during those days, just before the Renaissance and during the Renaissance. One is the foundation of the other, of course. One doesn't replace the other, of course. But for some strange reason, in Italy, in this moment, I wish we could have more and more and more respect for science, not so much in terms of technical applicability, but understanding the concepts that are so crucial. And C.P. Snow, the English author who wrote this beautiful essay on the two cultures, he starts by describing his dinner party, and the dinner party says, well, everybody was laughing because somebody didn't know, I don't know, Dickens or some. So he asked, how about the second principle of thermodynamics? And they didn't think it was embarrassing. It is equally embarrassing to ignore Shakespeare or to ignore thermodynamics, because the notion of entropy will dictate quite clearly that you can't power an entire country out of the cyclet in the gym. You will need a power plant. And that is probably going to be nuclear, very likely. But that conversation, chances are, doesn't go very far in a country without scientific understanding. So eventually, everybody pays a cost for not understanding things. And I don't know if Renzi meant all this, but I do.
And the last things I want to add about science and the importance of science in Italy, I think a big gap that we have at the moment in Italy is how important is the women studied science. It culturally looks to me that in other countries, particularly in the UK, there is not this splitting between of this percentage of male studying engineering, for example, against female. But in Italy, this gap is huge. So we need really to radically change this, particularly starting from when we are kids and teaching to women they can do maths and science. Thank you.
Non ci sente
Le lacrimucce dopo 4 giorni.
Prima ricordare
Alcuni in realtà no.
Dai, una cosa
No, ce n'erano, ma tra l'altro noi lo trasmettiamo online, in diretta su YouTube.
anche pensare che portiamo un po' di
No, ha sbagliato. Sotto qualche sotto quale i ragazzi in realtà in tutto da cioè ci vogliono bene
ragazzi saranno via di questo.
Almeno sull'explainability.
cioè i nostri veniamo veramente seriamente esatto perché
Thank you for following the 2020.
assolutamente
Grazie per chiudere l'evento.
chiamano l'Italia però poi sì
poi anche questo non aiuta.
Ma non perché perché in Italia purtroppo perché abbiamo aperta, perché siamo cresciuti, conosciamo con le difficoltà che dobbiamo affrontare fin dalle